In the cold, unforgiving Tower of London, a 19-year-old girl spent her final hours preparing to face her fate. Catherine Howard, the Queen of England for barely 18 months, rehearsed placing her head on the executioner's block, determined to meet her end with dignity rather than the hysteria that had marked her imprisonment. What crime could warrant such a horrific end for someone so young? The answer lies not just in her alleged adultery, but in the ruthless political machine of Henry VIII's court, where youth, beauty, and innocence were mere commodities to be consumed and discarded. Catherine Howard's story is one of the darkest chapters in Tudor history, a tale that reveals the terrifying reality of life under one of England's most tyrannical monarchs. Born into the powerful Howard family around 1523, she was thrust into a world where women existed solely to serve the ambitions of men, their bodies and lives considered expendable in the pursuit of power. Her brief reign as Henry's fifth wife would end in accusations of treason, torture of her associates, and ultimately her own execution on a cold February morning in 1542. This is not merely a story of royal scandal, but a window into the savage machinery of Tudor justice, where confessions were extracted through agony, where the young and vulnerable were sacrificed to protect the powerful, and where the king's paranoia transformed personal relationships into capital crimes. Catherine Howard's final days reveal the true cost of Henry VIII's reign of terror and the horrifying ease with which absolute power could destroy innocent lives. The England of 1540 was a nation transformed by religious upheaval and political terror, where the court had become a dangerous maze of competing factions, and survival depended on navigating the king's increasingly erratic moods and paranoid suspicions. The Howards, one of England's most ancient noble families, saw an opportunity to restore their influence by placing their young kinswoman Catherine before the aging king's eyes. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's ruthless chief minister, had just engineered the king's disastrous marriage to Anne of Cleves, and his enemies sensed weakness. The Howard faction, led by the Duke of Norfolk, began positioning Catherine as the solution to the king's marital woes. Catherine Howard was a young and vibrant woman who caught the eye of the aging and ailing king, Henry VIII. The timing seemed perfect for the ambitious Howard family, as Cromwell's power was waning, and religious conservatives saw an opportunity to reverse the Protestant reforms. Catherine, with her beauty and Catholic connections, represented hope for those who longed for a return to the old faith. However, they failed to consider the king's growing instability and his willingness to destroy anyone who threatened his authority or wounded his pride. England in 1540 was a police state where informants lurked in every corner and private conversations could become evidence of treason. The court itself had become a gilded prison where courtiers smiled while plotting each other's destruction, and the king's favor could transform overnight into a death sentence. Catherine's childhood had been a study in neglect and exploitation, which would ultimately lead to her downfall. Orphaned at a young age, she was sent to live with her step-grandmother, the Duchess of Norfolk, where she was exposed to adult relationships and sexual knowledge far beyond her years. It was here that Catherine first learned the skills that would later be used against her, such as conducting secret relationships and navigating the complex world of sexual politics. Catherine's early relationships with Manox and Derham would later haunt her. Manox, her tutor, introduced her to physical intimacy while also teaching her to deceive her guardians. When that ended, Catherine quickly got involved with Derham, a gentleman in the Duchess's household. Their relationship was more serious, with promises of marriage and exchanged gifts. The dormitory became a place of whispered secrets where young women navigated desire and ambition. Catherine's roommates testified to the casual attitude towards sexuality in the household, with secret meetings common and the Duchess unaware. These early relationships would later be used against Catherine, transforming youthful indiscretions into evidence of her immoral character. The investigation that destroyed her began by examining her past, revealing the inadequacy of her guardians and the inappropriate relationships of her youth. By 1540, Catherine had caught Henry VIII's attention, but her path to becoming his fifth wife was paved with the debris of his previous marriages and the bodies of those who had crossed him. The king's pattern with wives had become disturbingly predictable. The king's marriage to Anne of Cleves had been a disaster from the start. He was desperate to get out of it and find someone new. The Howard family knew just how to appeal to the king's desires. They introduced the young and beautiful Catherine to him, and he was instantly smitten. The king showered Catherine with gifts, despite his own poor health and advanced age. Catherine, just 17 years old, had no idea of the dangerous game being played around her. The Howards coached her on how to capture the king's attention, and it worked. Within weeks, Catherine found herself the new Queen of England. But this position came with great risk, as she was now at the mercy of the aging and unpredictable king. Catherine Howard, a young woman, married a man nearly 30 years her senior. His previous wives had faced terrible fates, from divorce to execution. The Howard family celebrated their return to power. But Catherine seemed unaware of the history she was following. At first, Catherine's time as queen was a success. The aging Henry VIII seemed happier with his young wife's affection. He showered her with gifts, even using jewels that had belonged to his past wives, a macabre recycling of royal treasures. Catherine embraced her role as queen with enthusiasm. She delighted in the ceremonies, the beautiful clothes, and the power. She even intervened on behalf of prisoners, showing a compassionate nature that initially won her favor. However, Catherine's youth and inexperience made her vulnerable. Her warmth and friendliness were misinterpreted as flirtation by men who saw opportunity. Meanwhile, Henry's health was deteriorating rapidly, making him increasingly irritable and suspicious. Catherine's inability to quickly become pregnant added to the tension. Henry's desperate need for a male heir had already cost 2 wives their lives. The pressure on Catherine was enormous. The queen's every word and action was scrutinized for signs of disloyalty or improper behavior. Her private moments were invaded by servants loyal to political factions, not to her. Catherine Howard's downfall began with her relationship with Thomas Culpeper, a member of the king's inner circle. Culpeper's charm and proximity to power made him irresistible to the young queen, trapped in a marriage to the increasingly unappealing Henry VIII. Their affair started innocently enough, with casual conversations and glances, but it soon grew into something much more dangerous. Culpeper had regular access to the royal apartments, which he used to pursue a relationship with the queen, knowing the risks involved. Their secret meetings were facilitated by Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, who should have known the dangers of royal scandal better than anyone. Catherine's own handwritten letters to Culpeper would later be used as evidence against her, revealing the depth of their intimacy. The couple went to great lengths to conceal their activities, using coded messages and trusted intermediaries. But these precautions only served to demonstrate their premeditation, which would be used against them. Culpeper's motivations remain unclear, whether he was truly infatuated with the queen, seeking political advantage, or simply enjoying the thrill of the forbidden liaison. Regardless, his actions showed a reckless disregard for the consequences that awaited anyone who dared to betray the king. The king and Catherine's relationship grew bolder and less cautious over time. What started as stolen glances and brief talks turned into long private meetings and passionate letters. They both got caught up in their feelings and the excitement of their secret romance. But in October 1541, Catherine's past finally caught up with her. A reformer named John Lascelles revealed her previous relationships to the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer. Cranmer faced a tough choice: report the information to the king and risk another execution, or keep quiet and risk his own life. Cranmer decided to let the king read the accusations privately. Henry was shocked and furious at first, refusing to believe his young wife could deceive him. But as more evidence came out, his disbelief turned to the cold rage he'd shown with unfaithful wives before. The investigation that followed was brutal. Catherine's former lovers, Francis Durham and Henry Mannix, were arrested and tortured until they confessed. Their testimony painted Catherine as a willing participant in these relationships, which had started when she was still quite young. Catherine Howard was just a teenager when the trouble began. Thomas Culpeper was soon arrested, and under torture, he admitted to meeting with the Queen in private, though he denied their relationship was consummated. It's unclear if his confession was truthful or just a way to minimize his guilt. Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, was also arrested for her role in arranging the meetings between Catherine and Culpeper. Her testimony would prove crucial in establishing the premeditated nature of the alleged adultery. Catherine's final imprisonment began on November 14, 1541. She was confined to her apartments, isolated with only a few carefully selected servants. The conditions were designed to break her spirit and extract a full confession. She was denied access to writing materials, prevented from communicating with anyone outside, and subjected to constant interrogation. Catherine's emotional state deteriorated rapidly. Witnesses reported she alternated between hysteria and catatonic silence, unable to comprehend the collapse of her world. The once powerful queen was now powerless over even the smallest aspects of her daily routine. The interrogations focused not just on her recent relationship with Culpeper, but also on her past relationships and her failure to disclose them before marrying the king. The commissioners were particularly interested in whether she had entered a binding betrothal with Francis Durham, which could have made her marriage to Henry invalid and treasonous. Catherine's responses were inconsistent and contradictory, reflecting her emotional distress. Catherine Howard was a young and naive woman who struggled to understand the legal implications of her past relationships. Her lack of education made her vulnerable to the sophisticated arguments being built against her. As the investigation continued, it became clear that Catherine's fate had already been decided. The king's previous pattern with unfaithful wives left little doubt about the outcome. The legal machinery that would destroy Catherine was set in motion with ruthless efficiency. Parliament was summoned to pass a bill of attainder against the Queen, a process that would condemn her without a formal trial. The charges against Catherine were carefully crafted to ensure her destruction, including testimony from her former lovers and her own letters. Catherine's physical health began to deteriorate under the strain of her confinement. She lost weight, suffered from insomnia, and developed a nervous condition that made her hands shake uncontrollably. Even her bodily responses to stress were considered potential evidence of her guilt. In the end, Catherine's fate was sealed. The only remaining question was whether she would be granted the mercy of a private execution or subjected to the public spectacle of being burned at the stake as a traitor. Catherine Howard's final days were a tragic and harrowing ordeal. She faced her trials and condemnations with courage, even as her companions, Francis Durham and others, met more brutal fates. Despite her royal status, Catherine was confined in the same rooms that had held Anne Boleyn, a cruel psychological torment. Yet, in the face of certain death, she displayed a remarkable dignity and composure, spending her time in prayer and spiritual preparation. Her poignant request to practice placing her head on the executioner's block showed her determination to die with grace rather than succumb to hysteria. The speed and unanimity of the parliamentary process demonstrated the complete subservience of England's legislative body to Henry's tyrannical will, leaving Catherine with no recourse. Her final days in the Tower of London revealed both the cruelty of Tudor justice and the remarkable strength of a young woman facing her demise. Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of Henry VIII, faced her final days with a grim determination. She reportedly spent hours perfecting the positioning that would allow the executioner to complete his work efficiently. Her final letters, written with the help of her attendants, expressed genuine remorse for her actions while maintaining her innocence of the most serious charges. She acknowledged her failure to disclose her past relationships before marriage, but denied any adultery or conspiracy against the king. In her final days, Catherine showed a maturity and selflessness that had not been evident during her brief reign. She made provisions for her servants, requesting that they be cared for after her death, and expressing gratitude for their loyal service. On the evening of February 12, 1542, Catherine was informed that her execution would take place the following morning. She spent her final night in prayer and meditation, refusing offers of food but accepting the spiritual comfort provided by the priests who attended her. The execution was conducted with the same grim efficiency that had characterized Henry VIII's previous judicial murders, but it also revealed the extraordinary courage of a 19-year-old girl facing death with remarkable composure. The execution was scheduled for dawn to minimize the number of witnesses and reduce the potential for public sympathy. Catherine was led to the scaffold within the tower's walls, the same location where Anne Boleyn had met her fate 6 years earlier. The executioner was an expert imported from France, chosen for his skill in ensuring a quick and clean death. Catherine's final moments were marked by a sense of composure and preparation. She carried herself with grace, even impressing those who had come to witness her downfall. Her final speech followed the traditional formula, acknowledging her offenses, asking for prayers, and forgiving those who had brought about her destruction. She understood that any attempts to proclaim her innocence or appeal for mercy would be futile. The execution itself was swift and efficient, carried out by a skilled French executioner. Catherine's suffering finally came to an end after months of imprisonment, interrogation, and psychological torture. She was buried in an unmarked grave within the tower's chapel, joining the ranks of those who had fallen victim to Henry's matrimonial paranoia. The destruction of all the principal figures in the scandal, including Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, and the Duke of Norfolk, demonstrated the lengths to which Henry would go to eliminate anyone connected to his wife's alleged betrayal. The brutal efficiency of Catherine's execution and the methodical destruction of those around her revealed the true nature of Henry's reign. Not justice, but the arbitrary exercise of absolute power. The aftermath of Catherine Howard's execution reverberated through English society, serving as a stark reminder of the dangers that faced anyone who dared to cross Henry VIII or become entangled in the treacherous world of royal marriage. The king's brutal execution of his fifth wife sent a clear message to his subjects. They knew the consequences of betrayal, real or imagined. Parliament quickly passed a law condemning Catherine without a trial. This revealed Henry's paranoia and insecurity in his relationships with women. Catherine's downfall strengthened the Protestant reformers who had orchestrated it. Henry blamed her entirely, portraying himself as the victim. His callousness in ordering the execution of a 19-year-old girl showed his complete lack of moral accountability. Lessons from Catherine's case influenced Henry's search for a sixth wife. He carefully investigated Catherine Parr's background, choosing her for her maturity and Protestant beliefs. Catherine's fate reinforced the absolute power of the king. Even the highest-ranking subjects had no protection when they fell from favor. This atmosphere of fear and subservience would characterize the rest of Henry's reign. Catherine Howard's story has been reframed. Scholars now see her as a victim, not a promiscuous adulteress. Her early relationships were abusive, and her later actions were shaped by this trauma. The legal process that condemned her was deeply flawed. Her story reveals how women's bodies and sexuality were controlled by men and the state. Her tale continues to captivate as it speaks to issues of power, consent, and justice that still resonate today. Catherine Howard's life and death tell a tragic tale. As a young, beautiful woman, she rose to the highest position in the land. But her youth and beauty became the tools of her downfall when they failed to serve the ambitions and desires of the men around her. Her story is a stark reminder that absolute power corrupts, and the innocent can be destroyed by forces beyond their control. Behind every historical fact lies a human being whose suffering deserves to be remembered, not just as entertainment, but as a warning about the dangers of unchecked authority and the vulnerability of the powerless in a society that sees them as disposable